It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a Black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States.
Look, I am going to say first and foremost, congratulations to Ketanji Brown Jackson. She's ascending to the Supreme Court. This is basically her ascending to the High Court. So yes, I'm going to start off saying congratulations. Nothing I say in this video is going to be to mar her as an individual, specifically, as a person. All of this that I'm going to say is going to be very critical, and I suppose on some level controversial, but it's the way I see it. Agree, disagree. I have great qualms with the way this was handled, from the beginning of it all the way up until the point where she was ascending to office. When she gave her speech, within the first minute of that speech, minute and 8 seconds, she's already invoked the fact that she's a Black woman going to the Supreme Court, as if the race is the major thing in that process, not necessarily just the fact that she has skills, capabilities that make her the best person for that particular job. And even if there's subjectivity added into how you choose a particular person, fair enough. But should that be the focal point? And should that be the focal point in a society that is trying to get beyond this notion of continuously hitting its head on race? Meaning, I think wokeness misses the point. And this is kind of one of those cases where it dramatically misses the point. The goal in that process was not to find a Black woman for the Supreme Court. Even if you chose a Black woman, that's perfectly fine. But the goal should have been the best person for the job, and that just so happens to be this African-American woman. That's not the way this process went. That is not the way this process went. So, like I said, nothing about her. All of it is about the process. And yeah, I found the process to be somewhat racist and degrading. And whatever Republicans and the tenor the Republicans took on that, okay, that's one thing. But the entire thing was oriented and geared around an African-American woman. Meaning, we need to find an African-American woman for this very specific position, because that's what Joe Biden wants for that very specific position. And you start from that list, as opposed to starting from we just want the best person for the job. And in this case, it happens to be a Black woman. There's a dramatic bit of difference in those things. The point that I'm making here is the context of this in the very beginning was set with this idea of only Black women need apply. Only Black women need apply. And not even something that you kept internally, you advocated for that very loudly, that this is going to be a short list of African-American women. It's almost as if you're doing an affirmative action thing for the Supreme Court, just like you did for the vice presidency. And yes, it went dramatically poorly in the vice presidency. And why do I say that? I say that because Clyburn elicited that concession from Joe Biden in order for Clyburn to give Joe Biden his support for South Carolina. You judge for yourself how well that has gone. And it's not that I think there's any issue at all with Justice Brown. I am also making the point that if you're the White House and you're trying to be this kind of progressive thing on issues of race, especially in various positions of authority, okay, fair enough. I applaud that. Nothing wrong with that at all. Not just applaud it. I approve of it. But what happens when you start off saying, we're going to find a Black woman for this position, as opposed to, here's the best person for the position, and that best person just so happens to be Black? One is an overemphasis on the issue of race. One is not just an overemphasis on race. It makes it look as if the person that you are getting was not necessarily the best candidate, that you were basically grading on a curve when you chose her, because you were using her race as being the main and primary reason and rationale behind her being in that slot, as opposed to her just being the best candidate that just so happens to be Black. And even if internally, your internal conversation was based around getting an African American woman for that position, again, there is a logic to symbology in regards to putting a person of a particular persuasion in a position. I mean, the various people in that society will look up to that particular person. The various people in that society, especially that can identify with the person, will see, oh, this is attainable, this is possible, etc., etc. I get it. Totally get it. But you thwart that process if you overemphasize her race as being the primary mover and shaker of her being in that slot. That's what I'm getting at. If you want to have that internal debate, then have that internal debate. Make that choice internally. But when you're going out and putting it into the public, this is the best person for the job. Her race should be minimized in that situation in order to get across how your administration is so woke, that it no longer needs to overly emphasize the fact that the woman is black and that the issue is content of character and capability and skill and etc., etc. There's a difference in those things. There's a massive difference in those things. Star Trek did race exceptionally well, and Discovery went and screwed it up entirely. Lieutenant Uhura, when she was on the bridge of the ship, they didn't spend time talking about a race. Why didn't they spend time talking about a race? Because that society at that point had been so integrated that it didn't matter. What mattered was the content of her character, skills, capabilities, etc. And I'm not necessarily saying that we're at a Star Trek integration. Clearly, we're not. I am saying, though, that if you're trying to project how African Americans, or let's say Hispanics, or transgender, or whatever else, is capable of doing a particular job, and that the content of their character is the thing that is the most important in regards to putting them in that position, the way to do that is not to create a short list and advocate that race is going to be the primary issue. The way to do that would be to choose her for that slot with the full recognition that she's the best person for that job. Period. There's a difference in those things. And yes, there's a certain subjectivity that you're always going to have when you're choosing a particular person. And there's going to be a litany of people who can fit that particular slot. Again, race can be the thing that you want for that slot for ideological reasons. Fair enough. I take zero issue with that if you're going to have that kind of internal dilemma or that internal choice. My point is, you shouldn't ding her. It's pretty degrading and pretty racist on its face to basically say all of this thing that's the totality of a person, we're going to boil that down to her race as being the primary reason to choose the person for that slot. It is degrading. You are literally taking the totality and cutting it down as if her color of her skin and the fact that she has a vagina is the most important thing in a judicial decision. It's not that it's an ideological choice that's the problem. It's how you went about putting her in that slot. That's what I'm getting at. Let's have a conversation about it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and of course, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Also, Super Chats at this point. So I have watched this, and I don't think I've commented on this, but I have great qualms with the way they've put this nomination together. It's not about the way they confirmed it. That's not an issue. It's not the fact that she's an African-American woman. I approve of that. Not even just approve of it. I applaud that, again, for the same symbolic rationale for her being there. No, my criticism is just based on Biden and the way he went through this process. And for whatever reasons you want to hit Republicans on this, keep in mind the entire context was set by Joe Biden on this thing of we're going to choose a black woman for this position, and that being the context for the choice. And all the way through that, inextricably linked, intrinsically linked to it. The very framing of this as being historic is linked to the fact that she is an African-American woman. Otherwise, nobody would care, right? And so when I make this point about race being the key mover and shaker, it was. Even in the framing, even in the way that the media talked about it, even in the way Democrats talked about it, it was always this idea of this is going to be a historic thing because we're going to choose a black woman for this position. As opposed to, we've reached the point where this African-American woman was the best person for this particular job at this particular moment. Yes, there's subjectivity and best and everything else, and you can have all sorts of reasons, but from our deliberations eternally, she was the best person for the job. Now, would people know that this is a nod on some level? Yes, they would know that. Would it be the thing that is the biggest focal point? No, it would not be. And what gets across, let's say, the purpose of wokeness, meaning if you wanted to get to the kernel of it in this kind of schoolboy philosophy way, isn't it to get to a point in a society where her skills and character matter more than the fact that she is black? And I'm making the point that it is racist on its face to say we're going to get somebody who's black in this particular position as opposed to we're going to get somebody who's phenomenal for this position who just so happens to be black. There's a difference in those things. There's a big difference in those things. This is Cory Booker. Look at this nonsense.
There is a love in this country that is extraordinary. You admitted it about your parents. They loved this nation, even though there were laws preventing them from getting together. When they were loving, there were laws in this country that would have prevented you from marrying your husband. It wasn't that long ago, it was last generation. But they didn't stop loving this country, even though this country didn't love them back. Today, you're my star. You are my harbinger of hope. This country is getting better and better and better. And when that final vote happens and you ascend onto the highest court in the land, I'm going to rejoice. And I'm going to tell you right now, the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, will be better because of you.
He looks like he is about to cry. He looks like he's about to cry. The entire questioning and his entire point was, this country is getting better because we're going to put a black woman in that slot. And look, I would agree with him on that if the fact that she wasn't a black woman wasn't the highest priority in this particular moment, as opposed to her just being the best justice for the job. Again, there's a world of difference in those things. If you come out and say, we're looking for the best person, okay, great. This person happens to be black, white, gay, straight, trans, whatever. That's who that best person is. And if internally you wanted to put somebody as an African American in that position because you wanted to give this projection of this is what's possible, this is what's feasible, this is what you can attain, etc. All this stuff is great. I've made that point about the Bill Cosby show. How when you can see this image, where you can get it in your head of a black lawyer, black doctor, awesome kids, you had a lot of people that started to emulate or at the very least find that to be a potential of what they wanted to be and started to go into the various African American colleges and universities. So yes, there is an effect to being able to see yourself in those positions where you feel that in those spaces, this is something that's attainable. Agreed. And if we were in the 60s, I would totally agree that these type of symbolic things was important. I mean, for whites are fish in water in this stuff. Over the course of the time that African Americans have been in this country, there's been a denigration of image. There's been attacks on image, whether it's from criminal justice, and many of those things were used in order to sustain a society that was just radically, radically racist and needed to keep this kind of second-class citizenship. You had certain jobs that was barred. You had certain locations to live in that was barred. Certain positions of authority that was, again, barred. And so you go that all the way up until the 80s or 90s, where you have a certain momentum. History has no breaks in it. And so there is this thing of, yeah, putting somebody in a slot, at the very least, gets the public accustomed to the fact that the person can be in the slot. And that people who look a particular way, despite the fact that they were disadvantaged for all of those years, can and will and do get there. Agreed. Get it. Totally get it. But this is not the 1960s. And not just 1960s. It just seems like the way to go about that is not to undermine her and undermine her skill set and her knowledge base. I mean, for God's sake, you work your entire life in the political space, and then when you're plucked mainly because you're black. Think about that. As if her blackness is going to be the thing that does her legal stuff, as opposed to her, all of the years of experience that she was able to attain working in that particular field to be at that particular point where he could choose her for that particular slot. The fact that he made it a short list, again, makes it look like it's grading on a curve. That's my issue with this. You shouldn't gut her like that. And I get that she's okay with it. I get that she thinks that this is great and going to the Supreme Court. She has the blackest name ever in the history of anybody that will probably ever end up on that court. But that's secondary to the point of whether she should be okay with that. And yeah, one of my first few speeches would have been, I guess you can't even bring that up, can you? Guess you can't even bring that up. Media has framed this as this was a great thing. Republicans have basically went after her on certain issues. And from the standpoint of Democrats, they're celebratory. They're celebratory. We got a black woman on the Supreme Court. And none of them understands that this kind of wokeness stuff, and the point of it is not to triumphantly scream, we got a black woman in the Supreme Court. Yes, you can have those conversations. That's not the issue. It's more so this notion that she got to the Supreme Court because of how good she was, not her race being the primary factor in the decision. Again, there's a world of difference in those things. One is a competent, capable actor, and the person is being chosen because of such. The other one is all of these other people, no need to apply. This is just going to be a short list of black women, whether they are best for the position or not. Because inherent into the conversation is basically, it didn't matter whether there was another better candidate. From my point of view, you should have presented that as if it did matter and there wasn't a better candidate. There's a difference in those things. There's a massive difference in those things. Also, let's be clear. This is not being done for altruistic reasons. Yes, there's an altruistic effect from the standpoint of the way people are perceiving if they identify with themselves on some level. But two things. Just because a person looks like you or you identify with them doesn't necessarily mean that the choices and decisions that they make are going to be in line with your best interests. We need to get away from that point. I am not sure at this point why anybody will believe that to be true, but that is the way Democrats do their politics. They would have a particular person. They say, hey, this person is Hispanic. You should vote for them because they're Hispanic. It's like, why? They look like you. They have a similar cultural heritage as you. It's like, but yeah, dude, class is the thing that matters more in that situation, not the way that person looks. And if the person is of a particular class or is geared around of people of a particular class, I would guarantee you that that will be the key and determining factor of the things that they do when they're in a position of authority. Not that they are of a particular cultural heritage or look like you. Yes, they would play that up. Yes, they would talk about it. Yes, Obama would dribble the basketball. It's like, look how black I am. They would do stuff like that. Hillary Clinton would say, look at my hot sauce. I just pull out of her pocketbook. I keep it with me. They will do like that in order to pander and cater to various racial demographics that they believe or sexual demographics, harvest votes and take advantage of. Image is just one of those ways they kind of pull that off, and trying to look that much more sometimes helps their cause in that. But that should not necessarily be confused with issues of class that are going to matter far, far more. Last point. Democrats are terrified of what will be an apocalyptic midterms. At the very least, that's what I think it's going to be, apocalyptic. In doing so, part of the issue here is that a lot of people have been leaving the party, especially some of its main constituencies. And one of those constituencies, of course, is blacks. Before we can get to that point, the child tax credit. This was a phenomenal idea. And I definitely gave Biden a accolade for this. Unfortunately, it was very short-lived. Now, what this ended up being was almost like a Social Security for kids, where $250 to $300 would be deposited in the bank account of the parents each month. If I was growing up with this, that would have been dramatic. My mom did not make even $15 an hour for the time that she was basically working. And so if you think about that, you're barely making ends meet. I mean, you still got to pay rent. She's a single parent. You got to pay food, car, etc., etc. And oftentimes, she would be in this position where even $50 is not there, even let alone $100. Getting $250 or $300 would have been a dramatic difference and a dramatic burden that would have been lifted in many respects. This shouldn't be understated. I mean, if you think about John Kiriakou was talking about this program that Trump instituted where people would get out, the government will help them with job, money, housing, etc. And what they found was, it's like, no duh, that basically the people who got that succeeded and the recidivism rate among those people basically went down. And you should say, well, yeah, no duh. You assisted, you took off a certain level of burden and stress that those people would have had to encounter. Also, you assisted them in finding a new way of orienting themselves and doing things. And you gave them the financial backing to give them time to do it. Okay, what does that look like for kids? I mean, kids are literally our only device in order to shape what the future of this place is going to look like. And how those kids are raised, the conditions those kids are raised in, the level of stress that those kids have to encounter. All of that stuff is going to go into creating this implicit character of a person. That character can be either darker or the character can be even or lighter. The experiences that those kids go through will be the thing that shapes and builds our future later on. And if we want to have a society that is more rational, that is less hostile, that is less belligerent, and that is more focused around this notion of some level of progress, then you got to deal with a real physical matter, material concerns, and you got to deal with that. As children, they are going to be oriented around a particular point of view and a particular way of looking at the world. And I can't say solely dependent upon, but dramatically dependent upon how they were raised and the conditions those kids were raised in. My point is this. I don't want kids going to school hungry, nor do I want kids worrying that they're going to be able to have a roof over their heads because of the eviction notices that are on the door of their parents. I don't want those kids living in horrible neighborhoods where they have to basically dodge bullets in order to get to school. Think of the level of productivity that we basically lose when we allow generations of kids to basically squander in poverty. Yes, on some level, you can make an argument that this is almost even a capitalist argument. I'll say it's somewhat of a socialistic argument. We have a huge amount of labor that is potentially in the public itself, not to mention the level of schooling. Think of what could take place if those kids, any kid, can go to school, meaning college or anything else, and that stuff will get supported by the back end of the society. What does that mean for society when you've actualized all of these various people that up to this point and given, let's say, the same way we go about our politics now, waste of labor, waste of talent, waste of potential, all of that stuff, and we do it constantly. The point that I'm making here is we should be investing in our kids. That should be damn important. And the last thing we should want is for those kids to grow up in persistent difficulties. Yeah, I agree with this. I thought this was a great policy. In the same way Social Security did magnificent things for older folks, this was doing cutting poverty on some level. Biden said half. I don't know if it's half, but definitely was beneficial. Well, they nixed it. They nixed it. And the moment they nixed it, look at what happened. Poll of parents showing a 50-point swing to GOP after Joe Manchin kills tax credit. Joe Biden is your president, not Joe Manchin. If Biden wants to cede that power to him, that's on him. At the end of the day, a policy that was dramatically popular was nixed. And as it was nixed, the people who were benefiting from that policy switched from Democrat to Republican. And it went from a 15-point swing. And so it's gotten to the point where, right here, generic ballot, congressional Republicans now lead among tax credit recipients. The people who nixed it and who weren't going to support it by any measure are the people that the crowd turned to after that program was nixed. Again, I mean, should you be voting in Democrats if they can't just do basic things well? Right here, here's the other part, African Americans. Although Biden has lost ground with mostly every demographic group, he suffered especially steep losses with African American voters. In polling from NBC News, Biden's approval rating among African American voters has fallen from 83% last April to 64% today. Quinnipiac University surveys shows a similar trend, with Biden black support dropping 78% to 57% over the course of his first term in office. Much of that erosion has come at the last few months. A Pew Research survey released this week finds that Biden also bled 7 percentage points among support among black adults since September. Over the same period, the president suffered just 4 points of support from whites, virtually none from Hispanic or Asian voters. And this was an article back in January. His lot has not gotten any better on this. I'm sorry. I've had a Finnegan. The Finnegan is making me sleepy. So this is making me drowsy. It's like I'm fighting through this one. But I wanted to get this out before I dozed off. Before I dozed off again. My point is this. He is suffering support from African Americans, key constituencies of the Democratic Party. A key constituency of the Democratic Party. They went for Obama to what, like 94%? Something to that effect. And even in going for Biden, again, like 90%. And now you've seen that number steadily drop as they have been particularly unhappy with the Democratic Party. I've mentioned in the past, I've known people who say, I would never vote Republican, and then a couple of years later, vote. It's not that they're going to vote Republican, it's just they're not going to vote at all. Because in their heads, there's only a conception of two parties, which means that when they're pissed off at Democrats don't get that vote, even if they wouldn't necessarily go and vote for a Republican. Here's the other one, right here. Black men shift slightly towards Trump in record numbers, poll shows. Black men shift slightly towards Trump in record numbers, poll shows. So all of this language and propaganda that's been aimed at Trump is racist, Trump is sexist, Trump is bigoted, etc., you still get the shift taking place. Again, it's not because Republicans are saying anything that is bringing people over. It's more so they're so dissatisfied with the party and the way the party is basically functioned in providing real world tangible gains that they're less inclined to support them. What has the Democratic Party done for me lately? That's basically what African Americans are asking. Now, on some level, that's African Americans' fault, right? If you're going to vote for a party 90% at that level without getting anything in return for that vote, you're basically wasting that support and the leverage that can be conferred through that level of support. Either way, though, it is true also, though, that Democrats get $15 an hour minimum wage, okay? Didn't want to get that passed. What effect would that have had? Child tax credit. Again, dramatically good effects, especially from the standpoint of the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. Next, couldn't even get that straight, or couldn't even keep that going. And I'm pretty sure you can go down the list of this stuff. The marijuana convictions, again, hitting people at the bottom end of the economic spectrum that much more. Again, power of the presidency to do something about it, chooses not to. So people aren't crazy for pointing out, hey, what happened to that public option? You said you would veto Medicare for all, but you did say you were going to try a public option. You didn't even get that done. That's an issue. You get the support in order to put various people in those positions. The Democratic Party has a thin majority. It is a majority nonetheless. And yet, when it becomes necessary for you to basically do things for your constituencies to say, hey, there is a reason and a rationale to put these guys in office. It's the opposite of that. Meaning, I haven't seen any justification or any legitimate argument that would justify people going out and voting Democrat. You had the votes. You were given absolute authority from the standpoint of the House, the Senate, and the President. Do it. You just didn't do it. And ask people to get their vote. And so if you're not going to give them anything real and tangible, they're not going to get the $15 an hour minimum wage. They're not going to get the legalization of marijuana. They're not going to get the healthcare system, or at the very least the modest public option forward. The Build Back Better plan didn't go anywhere. You lied about the situation that was going to take place in Afghanistan. Your COVID response is utterly appalling and abominable in regards to the number of people that have basically lost their lives during the time frame when the adults came to the room. What are you going to run on? What are you going to run on? You haven't done the things that you said you were going to do. And so if you can't get anything real, tangible, where you can confer, this is what we did when we were in that office. Here are our successes. We were able to get these people on board in order to do X or Y. No, I did not lie as your president and tell you any and everything that I needed to tell you just to get your vote. Here are my real works. That's one way of doing it. Or we haven't gotten any of that stuff done, but here's a black person as a vice president. Here's a black person as a Supreme Court pick. Here's a black person as something, with hopes that people will be gullible enough to say, hey, he put somebody in that position and somehow that positively benefits me in some real and tangible way. Again, the symbology of it is without question, but that's not really the point of that position. The point is not to get this kind of symbolic thing. That's more of a meta rationale that goes beyond just the purely governmental choice of a person. Fair enough. But just because they look like you, just because they have a vagina, or just because they have a dark skin tone, just does not mean that they are going to, by definition, benefit your interests. As a flat fact, that is true. Yes, a person's, let's say, cultural context and how they were raised will have effects on how the person looks at the world. Yes, that is very true. But so will class. So will class. That's all I'm saying. It's not this one-to-one as if I'm putting this person in and I'm doing that for you. Clyburn said that nonsense about Kamala Harris, talking about black folks should stop. Asking the Democratic Party, what did they do for him? They gave him Kamala Harris. Like, shut up. Be happy with the vice presidential pick. That was an affirmative action pick also. Not so much. Not so much. My issue is not with Justice Jackson. And she will be ascending to the office when Breyer steps down. It's not her. She could have been chosen and put out as, this is the best person for the job. Oh yeah, she just so happens to be black. She could have been put out that way, which would have emphasized her skill, her capability. And the fact that she's African American would have just been a secondary factor. And because it would have been a secondary factor, she would have had that much more bang for the buck in regards to her being in that position. We got her. She was the best person for the job. That's all that we need to say about it. Oh, right. Yeah, she just so happened to be black. And you can still have your historic announcements and everything else, but at the very least, you wouldn't gut her at the knees to make it look as if you're doing her a favor and doing blacks a favor by leapfrogging her to the position. That is a horrible, horrible representation of putting somebody in a role like that. I get she accepted it. I get she was fine with it. And yeah, the fact that it's the Supreme Court is probably louder than this kind of philosophical element of this case. But in this case, the philosophy matters. How you present that person matters. And the context of using race as being her main rationale to be in that slot is woefully unfortunate. Woefully unfortunate. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. And I'm going to say subscribe. There are people here tonight. Michael Pino. Oh, thank you, Michael Pino. I appreciate it, man. And there is one more. Oh, I can't see that from here. I think that's open. What is that? EA Munji? I think that's what that is. Yeah, guys. I was sitting here and I was trying to do this video, and the Finnegan was kicking my ass. And eventually I realized I had nodded off doing the news. Nodded off doing the news. That's called commitment. That's called commitment. All right, I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks all.